Don Mattingly might be one of baseball's most respected figures, but his least favorite players reveal a dark side that most fans never see. The man known as Donnie Baseball is currently serving as bench coach for the Toronto Blue Jays, helping guide the next generation of talent. But throughout his legendary career as both player and manager, Mattingly developed some serious grudges that showed just how stubborn and unforgiving he could be. You probably know Mattingly as the clean-cut Yankees captain who embodied everything great about baseball. 9 Gold Gloves, an MVP award, and that classic swing that made him a Monument Park legend. But what you might not know is how his obsession with old-school discipline turned him into baseball's ultimate control freak, creating bitter feuds with some of the game's biggest stars. See, Mattingly's whole philosophy was built on one traumatic experience. He had to retire at just 34 years old because of a devastating back injury that cut short what should have been a Hall of Fame career. That early retirement haunted him forever. It made him absolutely intolerant of any player who had talent but didn't use it perfectly. In his mind, if you were lucky enough to have ability, you better not waste a single opportunity. This mindset turned Mattingly into someone who demanded perfection from everyone around him. And when players didn't meet his impossible standards, things got ugly fast. His managerial record tells the whole story. Despite all his knowledge and experience, he finished with 889 wins and 950 losses. That's a terrible .483 winning percentage. Why? Because his rigid approach just didn't work with modern players. But before we dive into his worst feuds, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a coach or boss who was impossible to please? Someone who expected perfection and made your life miserable when you fell short? Drop a comment below and tell me about it. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button because we're about to expose some seriously petty behavior from one of baseball's supposed good guys. Let's start with the feud that basically defined Mattingly's entire approach to authority. Back in the 1980s and 90s, Yankees owner George Steinbrenner had this ridiculous facial hair policy. No beards, no long hair, nothing that made you look different from a 1950s businessman. Even mustaches had to be perfectly trimmed. Now you'd think Mattingly, being the ultimate team player, would just go along with it, but he didn't. He constantly fought Steinbrenner over the length of his sideburns. Can you imagine? The team captain of the New York Yankees getting into screaming matches with his boss over hair length. It got so bad that the whole thing became a joke on The Simpsons, where cartoon Mattingly gets kicked off a softball team because his sideburns are too long. But here's the twisted part. Instead of learning that arbitrary rules are stupid, Mattingly learned the exact opposite lesson. He decided that if he had to suffer under someone else's control, then everyone under him would have to suffer too. This experience turned him from a player who hated unfair rules into a manager who enforced them without mercy. The worst part is how this affected his relationship with actual talented players. Take Yasiel Puig, for example. When Mattingly became the Dodgers manager, Puig was this incredible raw talent who could do things on a baseball field that most players only dream about. But because Puig hadn't been through the traditional minor league system, he sometimes made fundamental mistakes. Instead of working with Puig and helping him learn, Mattingly publicly humiliated him. He constantly complained to reporters about Puig's baseball savvy and how he made too many errors. He'd point out every base running mistake, every time Puig didn't know the count or the situation. Mattingly said these mistakes happened more than it should, which is just a passive-aggressive way of calling someone stupid. The really unfair part was that Mattingly admitted Puig brought great energy to the team and helped them win games. He even said he had to take the good with the bad. But instead of focusing on developing Puig's strengths, Mattingly spent all his time criticizing his weaknesses. He treated a generational talent like a problem that needed to be fixed, rather than a gift that needed to be nurtured. And when his traditional approach of demanding discipline didn't work on Puig, Mattingly just gave up. He couldn't handle the fact that some players learn differently or need different kinds of coaching. His one-size-fits-all method was a complete failure, but he was too stubborn to admit it. Things got even worse when Mattingly moved on to manage the Miami Marlins. In 2017, he was so obsessed with defending baseball's unwritten rules that he started a bench-clearing brawl with his former team, the Dodgers. The whole thing happened because Corey Seager had the nerve to swing at a 3-0 pitch when his team was already winning 5-0. Mattingly completely lost his mind over this. He said the swing violated the unwritten rule about not running up the score late in the game. He actually argued that swinging on a 3-0 count in the 8th inning was somehow disrespectful to the losing team. Can you believe that? A professional athlete getting angry because another professional athlete was trying too hard to win. This incident showed just how out of touch Mattingly had become with modern baseball. While other teams were using analytics and trying to maximize every opportunity to score runs, Mattingly was stuck in some fantasy world where baseball players were supposed to feel bad about being too good. He valued some imaginary code of honor more than actually winning games. But Mattingly's need to control everything didn't stop with players. He also had constant battles with umpires that showed showed just how impossible he was to work with. Throughout his playing and managing career, he was ejected over 30 times for arguing with officials. 30 times! That's not passion, that's a pattern of disrespect. As a player in 1994, he got thrown out for arguing a check swing call and claimed it cost his team a win against Cleveland. As a manager, he'd blow up over pitch calls and blame umpires for his team's failures. He constantly complained that umps were missing them both ways every day, as if somehow the officials were specifically trying to hurt his teams. What makes this even more pathetic is that Mattingly demanded perfection from umpires while making excuses for his own failures. He wanted every call to be perfect, every strike zone to be identical, every decision to go his way. When that didn't happen, he'd throw tantrums like a little kid who didn't get his way. But what really made Mattingly's controlling behavior so damaging was how it affected the locker room culture wherever he went. When you have a manager who's constantly criticizing players and picking fights with officials, it creates a toxic atmosphere where everyone's walking on eggshells. Players start playing not to make mistakes instead of playing to win. The Puig situation is the perfect example of this. Here you have a player who brings excitement and energy to the game, someone who can make highlight reel plays and get fans out of their seats. But instead of celebrating that, Mattingly spent his time nitpicking every base-running error and situational mistake. He turned what should have been a fun, dynamic player into someone who was constantly second-guessing himself. The really sad part is that Mattingly's obsession with control actually made him a worse teacher. Good coaches know that different players need different approaches. Some guys learn by making mistakes and figuring things out. Others need constant instruction and guidance. The best managers adjust their style based on what each player needs. But Mattingly only had one mode, his way or the highway. He expected every player to learn the game exactly the way he did, with perfect fundamentals and total submission to authority. When that didn't work, he didn't try different methods. He just got more frustrated and more demanding. What makes this even more ridiculous is how Mattingly's own playing career showed the value of adapting to difficult circumstances. Remember, he had to deal with Steinbrenner's crazy hair rules for years. He knew firsthand how frustrating it was to work under someone who made arbitrary demands and refused to listen to reason. You'd think that experience would have taught him to be more flexible as a manager. Instead, it did the exact opposite. Mattingly became the thing he once hated. He turned into his own version of Steinbrenner, making unreasonable demands and expecting perfect compliance from everyone around him. The student became the master, but he learned all the wrong lessons. This is why his relationship with Dave Winfield was probably the only positive rivalry in his entire career. Winfield was already established, already disciplined, already everything Mattingly thought a player should be. They could compete with each other without any drama because they both fit the same mold. But put Mattingly in charge of someone who didn't fit that mold, and problems started immediately. The umpire feuds show another side of this control issue. Mattingly couldn't accept that baseball, like any sport, has human elements that can't be perfectly controlled. Umpires make mistakes. Calls get missed. That's just part of the game. But instead of focusing on what his team could control, Mattingly spent his energy fighting battles he could never win. Think about how much time and mental energy he wasted on these confrontations. Every ejection meant he couldn't help his team for the rest of that game. Every argument with an umpire was time he could have spent coaching his players or making strategic decisions. But his need to be right was more important than his need to win. Even worse, his constant arguing with officials sent a terrible message to his players. Instead of teaching them to focus on their own performance and stay mentally tough when things don't go their way, he was showing them that it's okay to lose your temper and blame other people when you're frustrated. That's not the kind of leadership that wins championships. This pattern of behavior shows someone who was fundamentally more interested in being vindicated than being successful. He wanted to prove that his way was the right way, even when the results clearly showed it wasn't working. His .483 winning percentage as a manager isn't just bad luck. It's the direct result of an approach that alienated players and created unnecessary conflict. The most frustrating thing about all of this is that Mattingly actually had moments where he recognized his own problems but couldn't change. When he talked about having to take the good with the bad with Puig, he was admitting that his traditional methods weren't working. He knew that Puig brought value to the team despite his mistakes. But instead of adapting his coaching style to help Puig improve, Mattingly just complained about it to the media. That's not coaching, that's just public shaming. A real leader would have worked privately with Puig to address the issues while protecting him publicly. Instead, Mattingly threw his own player under the bus because he couldn't figure out how to reach him. It shows a complete lack of emotional intelligence and leadership skills. The truth is, Mattingly's feuds with all these different people had one thing in common. He couldn't handle anyone who didn't fit into his narrow view of how baseball should be played. Whether it was Steinbrenner's arbitrary rules, Puig's learning style, Seager's aggressive approach, or umpires' human mistakes, Mattingly needed everything to be exactly the way he wanted it. This inflexibility is why his managing career was such a disappointment. He had all the knowledge and experience you could want, but he couldn't adapt to different personalities personalities or situations. Instead of building relationships and helping players grow, he spent his time fighting battles over things that didn't really matter. Despite all these problems, there's no denying that Mattingly's dedication to excellence made him a great player and taught him valuable lessons about the game. His current role as a coach with the Blue Jays suggests that maybe he's finally learned to work with players instead of against them. Sometimes the people who demand the most from us end up teaching us the most about ourselves, even if their methods aren't perfect. So before you go, let me know what you think. Was Mattingly just trying to maintain standards in a changing game, or was he an inflexible control freak who couldn't handle modern baseball? Hit that like button if this video changed how you see one of baseball's supposed good guys, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind your favorite players.